Good morning, Year 6. It's Miss Lister here, and it is Thursday, the 28th of January 2021. And in this science lesson, we're going to be continuing our work on light, and your objective is to conduct an investigation into the size of shadows. And we're wanting to see what impacts the size of shadows, what makes them bigger and what makes them smaller. What you will need for this investigation is you will need a torch and several objects and a ruler. We will come back to that in a little while, but just to make you aware, you are going to need some equipment for this lesson. As we do every science lesson, I would like to start with the three lasts. So, our first one, the last lesson, is which part of the eye allows light in? So thinking back to last lesson, which part of our eye allowed the light to come in? Last term, what happens to our heart rate as we exercise? Why? Explain. So you need to think back to when we counted our heartbeat and checked our pulse and what you noticed after exercise and before exercise, and write an explanation. So you need to have a because or a therefore in your answer. And then last year, which animal has a gestation period of 24 months? And remember that gestation means the amount of time that a mammal is pregnant for. So if we think very carefully, you need to choose whether it's an elephant, the cat, or the goldfish. Answers will be on the next slide. So here are the answers to our three last. So which part of the eye allows light in? That is the pupil. Remember the small black dot that you can see in your eye, and that actually gets bigger when you need to let more light in. So at night time it is usually bigger, and your iris, the coloured part of the eye, is the muscle that controls the opening and closing of that. Once light travels in through the pupil, it hits the retina at the back, which is our word aware from last week, and all of those cells there manipulate together to send the message to the brain through the optic nerve. So, last term, what happens to our heart rate as we exercise? Why? Explain. So my definition says our heart rate increases, really important, we know it goes up, but if you use the word go up or gets bigger, could you try and use the scientific word increases? So our heart rate increases as the body requires more oxygen, therefore the blood must be transported quicker to these areas in order to drop off the oxygen via the red blood cells. All of that is our science learning from last half term, all about the circulatory system. And finally, last year, which animal has a gestation period of 24 months? I think I might have made this one a little bit easier, but it is the elephant, okay? 2 years is the amount of time that an elephant is pregnant for. Obviously, a cat, we know, is much quicker than that, as is a goldfish. So, before we begin our actual science lesson, it's really important that we know our words and the vocabulary that we're going to be using. And our focus for this lesson is the word variables. And this comes into our working scientifically area of science. It's all about the practical learning. So I will say the word, then you can repeat it. Very strange does not being together, but I will say it, leave space for you to say it. I will say it again, then you say it. So I say variables, you say. I say variables, you say. The word is variables. So let's clap the syllables. Variables. That's 4. Variables. You have a go. So just try to remember that there are 4 syllables in that word. Now, the definition of a variable is anything which can change or could be changed. And we're going to apply the word variable to science here. So variables in science need to be controlled in order to see the effect on something else. So there are 3 types of variables. We have an independent variable. This is the variable. This is the thing that we change, we alter in a science investigation. So that is the thing that we're going to change because only one thing can change in order to make it a fair test. So that's one thing. The controlled variable, now you can have lots of these in the experiment, but these are the things we keep the same so they don't affect the outcome. So if I was measuring the amount of time that it took for an ice cube to melt on a plate, I would keep the style of plate the same, the size of the ice cube the same, the temperature at which I put the ice cube, the water into the ice tray the same. So we have to keep those the same, otherwise it could affect the fairness of the test. And then finally, the dependent variable, this is the thing which is affected due to changes in the independent variable. So what we need is we're going to be checking that thing to make sure that it is the same. So the dependent variable here in the ice example would be the ice cube, because that would be the thing that would change, say if it was outside, and that would be the thing that changed. Okay, so we'll go through the variables a little bit more as we keep going. So you can see here a diagram which is of shadows, and you've got the tree, you've got your source of light, which is the sun, and then you have your shadow. Now you can see here that the shadow is in different places. So I just want you to take a moment and think back to how we know that light travels and how that helps us to get shadows. The answer will be on the next slide, but I'd like you just to note down any ideas that you have about why we get shadows. So you should by now have thought about how shadows are formed. And yes, you would be right in thinking that they are formed because the source of light and those straight lines, those rays of light travelling from the source of light, are blocked by an opaque object, which then means the light rays are absorbed by that object and the dark shape, the almost outline of that shape, is formed behind or at the side of the object. And opaque means that light cannot travel through it. So any material that a light cannot travel through will cause a shadow. Our lesson today is going to really focus on what affects the size of a shadow, because sometimes you can have a very small shadow, but sometimes you can have a really big shadow. So I want you to take a few moments and come up with a scientific based question that we could investigate, and we could use equipment, a torch and a few objects to find out what affects the size of shadows. So take a few moments to come up with a question, and then I will show you a question that I think is perfect to investigate. You might want to rejig it afterwards. So, are any of your questions linked to the distance of the light source away from an object and the size of the shadow then? So thinking very carefully now, this is going to be a relationship-based investigation. So the distance of the light source and the size of the shadow should link very carefully together. So it's a relationship-based question. So I will show you how to write a question, and then we will make a prediction together that we'll write down, and we will see what we come up with at the end of our investigation. So my key question is going to be, how does the distance of a light source away from an object affect the size of a shadow? So you too could use this question because it is a relationship-based question. So I'm thinking that the actual distance, the nearness and the farness of the light source from an object will cause an effect on it. So I'm expecting to see some kind of relationship from this. So what we would do first in our investigation is we'll make a prediction. So write it down, note it down into your exercise books if you've got one, or onto a piece of paper, but keep it safe because you're going to need it next week when we do our evaluation. So you should be writing in full sentences. You can use my model or you can write your own, but this model shows you where to fill in the gaps. So I believe that when the object is closest to the light source, the shadow will be, you either think it's going to be bigger or smaller. I think as the object is moved away and the distance is further, the shadow will be either, you need to decide, bigger or smaller. And then we're going to get some evidence, investigate this, and some actual data, some numbers, some measurements that will prove our theory. What we need to be thinking about is how we can carry out this experiment. So this is going to be written up like a proper experiment. So we've done our key question, how does the distance of a light source away from an object affect the size of its shadow? We've done our prediction. You should have that noted down. Now we need our equipment. So you'll just make a quick list, and I've included a ruler, the light source, so this could be a torch or a lamp in your home, a pen for you to write down your measurements, and an object for you to shine the light onto. So you need to consider what that could be. It needs to be something simple that you could use. It could be a chocolate bar, it could be a pencil, it could be a ball, like a tennis ball, that would work, a flower, a plant, just something very simple that's not going to make a mess, that you can just move the torch away from each time and measure the size of its shadow. So we're now planning our investigation and thinking about our variables. Think back to our word aware. So we need to make this table and note down what are the things within our investigation that we're controlling and what is the thing we know will change. So you need to write down your independent variables. This is the only one thing that could change. The controlled variables. These are a few things that we'll need to keep the same in the investigation to make sure it's a fair test. And then the dependent variable, what is the thing that you expect to be affected by the thing we changed? So note down what you think, and then we'll go through what they should be on the next slide. So what variables did you get? So when I'm thinking about it, I consider all of the equipment and the measurements that I'm going to take. So my independent variable, the one thing that we will change is the distance away from the light source. So I might have it first of all 5 centimeters away, then 10 centimeters, then 15 centimeters, and then 20 centimeters. And then my controlled variables, the things I must keep the same to ensure that this is a fair test, the source of light. So you can't change the torch you're using halfway through. You can't change the lamp. So your source of light must remain the same. The ruler that you're using, just to ensure that it's exact every single time and the same, I keep the same ruler or the same measuring tape, whatever I'm using. The intervals for measurement. So like I said before, I said I was going to do 5 centimeters, then 10, then 15. That's fine, it's got an interval of 5. I could do 10, 20, 30, 40, and then I've got an interval of 10. It's just much more simple to see that. I could do it as intervals of 2, but the bigger interval should show us a difference. And then I want to keep the object that I have got the shadow from the same. If I change it halfway through, I can't measure the shadow because it would be wrong. It wouldn't be the same as it was for the other ones, so it would make an invalid test. It would no longer be fair. The angle that the light is shone at. This is going to be quite difficult, so don't worry if you do find this a problem, but I can't shine it down on the floor at it one time and then above it. I've got to try and keep it as similar as possible, so try to think about that when you're planning it. The ruler that you're using, I've done that one already, sorry, that's on twice, and the place where the object is put, okay? So if you have the object on a table one time, then you put it on the floor, then you put it on a chair, you can't do that. So you need to choose an area to keep it. I would advise perhaps it's done on the floor best, in a darkened room with the wall nearby so that you can see the shadow onto that. Okay, and then the dependent variable, the part that should be affected by us keeping some things the same but changing the distance, is the actual size of the shadow. That's the thing that I will be measuring. That's the thing that I'm expecting to change, so that's my dependent variable. So if you got that wrong, you might want to have another go at the fair test variables chart, which is saved in the documents, and fill it in again so that you know what you're keeping. Please make sure you put the name of the object that you are using. I'm just saying object because I'm not doing this right now, so I just am saying the object. You choose your object and write it into your variables table, please. At this point, we're pretty much ready to get started with our investigation, but we need a results table, something to record our measurements in. So this is where you need to decide on those intervals for the distance. I've designed this measurement chart, this results table. You can design your own. I have saved this into the attachments on the Edmodo so that you can actually use this one and fill it in if you prefer. But what I would suggest is that you do quite a few measurements, because this should hopefully show you a pattern between the distance of the light source and the measurement of the shadow. So the first measurement I've put is to be as close contact, put it as close as possible, then measure the shadow. So I'm making up my measurements 11.5 centimetres. I then do my interval 1, so 10 centimetres away, and I would move it, measure very carefully from the object 10 centimetres away and place my light source there. Then do another measurement. Then interval 2, I'd move my measurement my light source 20 centimetres back, then 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, and so on, so that I get a really clear and vivid image of what is happening to the shadow. So make sure you fill in and decide your intervals first before you begin, because you want to keep them. It could be that you did 5 centimetre intervals instead. I've chosen 10, it's just for the purposes of showing you what to do. But every time you move it, see the shadow, measure the shadow, write it down. Okay, so that should then give you your results table. Try to keep this safe for next week because you will need this for the graph. This is just a bit of a picture just to show you what your investigation could look like. So you might need to get somebody to help you to hold an object, but here you can see they've got the object, you can see the shadow behind it, you can see they're using the phone torch to do it, and that each time they're moving it back. So just make sure you've got your ruler to measure the shadow, and you've got your ruler available to measure the distance from the object, and the torch moving back from it. Okay, but this should definitely help you to kind of see that if you're struggling to understand what I mean. So now it is time for you to carry out your investigation. You need to complete your results table as you go, making sure that you keep those controlled variables the same in order to ensure a fair test. Make sure that you keep everything from this investigation ready for next week, because then you'll have your prediction together, your key question together, you will have your results table together, and from your results table and your variables table, we will produce a graph all together, a scatter graph, and a line graph which should show a relationship between the distance of a light source and the size of a shadow. So please keep them really safe. Upload all of your writing from this week and any photos that you've done of your investigation at the end of this lesson. So now it's time just to upload any of the work that you completed, any photos. Mrs. Ullah will be marking this today. I really hope that you've enjoyed your investigation today. Great to do a bit of practical science, and I look forward to seeing next week when we do our graphs and our evaluations. We should be able to see if there is a relationship between the distance of the light source and the size of a shadow. Thank you very much, and I will see you all soon.